Hey, what is going on, everybody? It's me, Ollie, aka TNSAttitude, and I am back again here on YouTube.com for all things professional wrestling. Now, today, folks, I am a few days in on this one. You know, Thursday was a very sad day in the wrestling industry. The news that broke Thursday evening, and it was like Thursday morning in the US, that Hulk Hogan, WWE Hall of Famer, had passed away at the age of 71 years old. Now, Hogan, for me, is a legend in wrestling. He really is. You know, I'm not going to go into Terry Bollea, the person, but in terms of his work in the professional wrestling industry, it cannot be, it can't be. This gentleman did some huge things. He brought wrestling to pop culture. He was the man who got the WWF out there into the bigger mainstream, and that is why he was a larger than life presence. He was a larger than life presence, and I enjoyed Hulk Hogan. When I was younger, when I got into wrestling, one of the to anyone that knows, when I got into wrestling, I actually got into the wrestling in the middle of 1999 when I was around 6 years of age. My first introduction to wrestling was actually WCW. And at the time, my introduction to Hogan was when he was Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And I loved Hollywood Hulk Hogan. I loved how just the how in his face he was. And, later on, I would, of course, learn about Red and Yellow and the Mr. America and the Hogan of the 80s and the early 90s, and I'd learn. And when I look back at his time in the WWF before I was born, I would really respect what he had done. Now, it's insane. I was very shocked when I was hearing, when I heard that Hogan had passed away. He was one of those sort of guys that he just looked like he was going to keep on going. He really did. And I met Hulk Hogan, in fact. There's actually a vlog on this channel. It's definitely still on here, from my WrestleMania 29 experience. And my experience with Hulk Hogan was a good one. I actually met him at the first ever WrestleCon in East Rutherford, New Jersey, over WrestleMania 29 weekend. And that in itself was an amazing experience to meet at the time, legend like Hulk Hogan at my first ever WrestleMania. I was 20 years old, and Hogan was there on the Saturday, and the Ultimate Warrior, late great Ultimate Warrior, was there on the Sunday. Now, with Hogan, at the time, they were doing the Hulk Hogan Experience, and this could be purchased at the time. I want to say it was around $100 for the experience. Now, back in those days, 2013, money and everything's changed over the years. $100 was actually quite a bit of money back then. It still is, but back those days, that was quite a premium payout. But I was glad I met him when I did, when he later on in life, when he was doing more through the Fanatics, his definitely the price went up, especially like around WrestleMania 40 week, when he was over there for the WWE World festivities. His price had definitely they'd increased his price. But just to kind of talk about my experience with when I met him, yeah, it was a crazy one. I remember the weekend pretty well. I remember being extremely tired through that whole week, because being WrestleMania 29, my first ever WrestleMania, I remember it being so busy. And the one thing that I remember about that week was just how little time I actually got to rest and sleep, because there was always something going on, to be up early to whether it was a meet and greet, and it was being the first Mania, our group was very adamant on wanting to really jump in on all the activities through that weekend. And of course, with things like WrestleCon being on in the morning, access, there was access sessions that we had obviously bought tickets for ahead of time. And then of course, when we then would find that Hogan was doing WrestleCon, that was like, oh, there's a clash, but we want to do both. So we were jumping in taxis and just going all around New York, New Jersey, doing this and that. But of course, with Hulk, we did the Ring of Honor show on the Friday, Supercard of Honor, and then I remember we didn't get back to the Red Roof Inn where we were staying. It was very late, early hours of the next morning, so Saturday morning, and I remember I remember getting up feeling like death, or I just feeling really tired at the time, and I remember we actually went to WrestleCon originally. Well, we went over to Access, and then would go to WrestleCon, of course, with having the Hogan experience being later in that morning. I remember getting in there, and I remember there being a queue, and I remember them saying like you can't film in here, but I remember going in the room, and then it was a pretty quick process. He was just taking all the pre-orders, and I remember him at the time just being like exactly how he was on TV. Just huge man. He was huge. He was huge. It's Hulk Hogan. He's jacked, absolutely jacked. And I remember just at the time I was actually wearing my Maximum Impact TNA shirt I bought that previous year at the TNA show in Nottingham, because of course I had met Hogan. I didn't meet Hogan at the time, but I saw Hogan at the Nottingham house show with Robbie and Gav and a few other people at the time. And of course we saw one of Hogan's last ever matches in the UK, and I think ever. He wrestled his last match, I believe, in Manchester. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he did a tag team 6-man match with James Storm and Sting, and they wrestled Kurt, Bobby Roode, and I believe it was Bully Ray, if I remember, my memory serves me correctly. But we were ringside for that, and yeah, it was great to see Hogan come out to Eye of the Tiger. I'm going off topic slightly, but that was the last we got to see Hogan wrestle at that show, which was really cool now looking back at it. But in terms of Hulk, that meet and greet I had with him really was a highlight of my weekend. I remember walking up to him, and he extended his hand, and I remember saying, "Hey," and he went, "Hey, brother," anyway. And at the time, I bought this. I got this actually from. It was off. I got this. It was from RetroWrestling.com at the time, and I remember buying this for like £20. But this is what I actually got signed by Hulk, and it was an old WCW NWO magazine, because of saying, from my childhood, remembering him as Hollywood Hulk Hogan. This was my best memory of Hogan, and what was really cool was there was no upcharge for an inscription. He even did me like a full-on script. I got to Wally. I'll read to show that to you. To Wally, best wishes, brother. Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Hall of Fame, 2005 for life, which is just an amazing, one of my favorite pieces, which I own in my collection. It really is. It's fantastic. And I've got a Warrior one as well, which I got signed on the Sunday. But Hogan was awesome, and I even said to him, I was like, I loved you as Hollywood when I was a young kid, and I remember him just saying, "Hey, it was a fun time," and then I did my impression. He was like, "That's very funny, brother," and then he thanked me for coming out, and then I was like, "Oh, we're doing the picture," which we did the biceps, which was cool, and then he slapped my chest and said, I love your shirt, brother," and that was it, and then I was on my way. But that was the experience I had with Hulk. I'm glad I got to meet him. He was a great, legend, and he was just I know there's people that meet him a lot. George Hulk, a big shout out to him. The gentleman lives in Australia, super fan. I know he would go out most years and meet Hulk Hogan when he was doing TNA and WWE. And of course, big shout out to my good buddy Mike Sorkin, who of course he named his business Immortal Seats after the Hogan, from Hogan. So. But yeah, it's a sad time for wrestling, and definitely Hogan has done a lot for wrestling and for where companies are now in the mainstream and everything. Hulk Hogan, and it's crazy now when you look at that golden age, when you look at who's gone. Hulk's now gone, Andre, Piper, Randy Savage, the Ultimate Warrior. They've all left us. They've all gone to drink beers in the sky, and it's just it's one of those. It's a sad time, but definitely he leaves behind a lot of great memories, and wrestling will live on. Hulk Hogan. That's the thing about these celebrities when they pass away. Their work will live on and you can go back and you can watch what you want to watch. But yeah, rest in peace, Hulk Hogan. It was fun to watch your matches, and thank you for being a legend when I met you in 2013. And yeah, but as I say, folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Ollie, and I'll catch you down the road for another video. I'm out, everybody.